The shimmering turquoise water, my daughter's laughter echoing in the summer air. It was our sanctuary. Then, the stench hit me. A thick, black sludge bled into the pool, a venomous stain spreading from her side of the fence. Her face, twisted in a smug grin, appeared over the hedge. "Accidents happen?" she'd sneered. But this was no accident. This was a declaration of war. And she had no idea who she was messing with. The first sign of trouble wasn't the acrid smell of petroleum that would later cling to everything like a shroud, but the silence. It was a Saturday morning in mid-July, the kind of sweltering Texas day that drove everyone to the cool, chlorinated embrace of a swimming pool. For Mark, his backyard pool was more than a luxury. It was a promise fulfilled. A promise to his late wife, Sarah, that their daughter, Lily, would have a perfect childhood, filled with sunshine and laughter, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital, rooms that had defined the last years of Sarah's life. Lily, a vibrant 7-year-old with her mother's bright eyes and an unshakable spirit, was already in her swimsuit, a blur of pink and purple bouncing by the sliding glass door. "Daddy, can we go in yet, please? The sun is sunny." Mark chuckled, ruffling her damp hair. "Just as soon as I finish my coffee, sweet pea. The sun isn't going anywhere." He had just finished the weekly chemical check, the familiar, clean scent of chlorine, a comforting ritual. The water was a perfect 82 degrees, crystal clear. The new mosaic tile at the bottom depicting a playful dolphin, a design Lily had picked herself. It was their little slice of paradise, nestled in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, or it had been. The silence that morning was from the other side of the 6-foot cedar fence. For the past 3 months, since Karen moved in next door, their weekends had been punctuated by a near-constant barrage of noise. Not the cheerful sounds of a family enjoying their home, but the grating, passive-aggressive symphony of a woman who seemed to thrive on conflict. It was the lawnmower at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, the deliberately loud, expletive-laden phone calls on her patio, the way her sprinkler system seemed to have an uncanny aim for his freshly washed car. Mark had tried to be neighborly. He'd brought over a welcome basket with a bottle of wine and fresh-baked cookies. Karen, a woman in her late 50s with a severe blonde bob and eyes that seemed permanently narrowed in judgment, had accepted the basket with a curt nod, her gaze sweeping over his modest home with an air of disdain. "I'm not much of a drinker," she'd said, her voice thin and sharp, "and my gluten-free diet doesn't allow for this." She'd gestured vaguely at the cookies. The basket later appeared by his recycling bin, the wine bottle unopened. The disputes had escalated, a complaint to the HOA about his basketball hoop, which had been there for 5 years, a note taped to his door about the excessive noise of Lily's laughter. Mark had tried to reason with her, to find some common ground, but it was like talking to a brick wall. A very well-maintained, immaculately landscaped brick wall. So on this Saturday, the silence was unnerving. Mark took a final sip of his coffee and slid the glass door open. "Okay, little fish, let's do it." Lily squealed with delight and shot out onto the patio, her flip-flops slapping against the hot concrete. Mark followed, grabbing their towels from the back of a lounge chair. That's when the smell hit him. It was faint at first, a chemical bitterness that cut through the sweet scent of the blooming jasmine on the trellis. He wrinkled his nose, scanning the yard. Had he spilled some chemicals? No, he was always meticulous. "Daddy, what's that? Black stuff?" Mark's eyes followed Lily's pointing finger. His heart seized. A dark, iridescent slick was spreading from the corner of the pool nearest Karen's fence. It looked like an oil spill in miniature, a greasy, rainbow-hued stain that was slowly, inexorably contaminating their pristine water. It clung to the white plaster, a viscous black wound in their perfect blue world. He moved in a daze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He knelt at the edge of the pool, the stench now overpowering, a nauseating mix of motor oil and something else, something foul and chemical. The source was clear. A steady dark trickle was seeping from a small, almost imperceptible gap at the very bottom of the fence, snaking across the concrete and into the pool drain. "Lily, sweetie, go inside," he said, his voice tight, strained. "Right now." But Daddy, the pool. "Now, Lily." The sharpness in his tone made her flinch. Her lower lip trembled, and she turned and ran back into the house, the sliding door slamming shut behind her. Rage, cold and pure, washed over Mark, eclipsing the shock. This was no accident. This was a deliberate, calculated act of malice. He stood up, his fists clenched, and stared at the fence, at the house beyond it. He could almost feel her watching, enjoying this. He marched to the fence, his mind racing. He could confront her, but what would that accomplish? She'd deny it, of course. She'd twist it, make him out to be the aggressor, the crazy neighbor. He needed proof. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He started recording, documenting the black sludge, the trickle from under the fence, the oily sheen spreading across his pool. He narrated what he was seeing, his voice a low, furious growl. He then walked to his garage and grabbed a small, clear, glass jar. Kneeling by the fence, he carefully scraped a sample of the thickest, blackest part of the ooze from the concrete before it reached the water. He sealed the jar tightly. He took another sample from the water itself, the oil clinging to the glass. With the evidence secured, he walked back to the fence, his anger now honed to a sharp point. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply said, his voice carrying, clearly in the still morning air, "I know what you did, Karen." For a moment, there was only silence. Then her face appeared over the top of the fence, just as he knew it would. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, a caricature of suburban leisure. A smug, self-satisfied smile played on her lips. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Having some pool trouble? You really should be more careful with your chemicals." "This isn't pool chemicals, and you know it," Mark shot back, holding up his phone to show he was recording. "This is oil, and it's coming from your yard." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before being replaced by a mask of indignation. "Are you accusing me of something? That's slander. I could sue you for that. Maybe you should take better care of your property. This is what happens when things fall into disrepair." "My property was fine until you moved in," Mark said, his voice dangerously low. "You've been trying to make my life a living hell for 3 months, and now you've crossed a line. You've brought this into my home, you've ruined this for my daughter, and you're going to pay for it." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, please, you're being dramatic. It's a little bit of runoff. Clean it up and get over it. What are you going to do? Call the HOA on me?" She smirked, knowing the HOA was a toothless organization, run by retirees who were more concerned with lawn height than actual malfeasance. "No," Mark said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm not going to call the HOA." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her smug expression wavering with a flicker of uncertainty. He went back inside, his heart pounding in his chest. Lily was sitting on the couch, hugging, a stuffed animal, her eyes wide with fear. He knelt in front of her, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Hey, sweet pea, I'm sorry I snapped at you. The pool is sick right now. We can't swim today." "Is it because of the bad lady?" she whispered. Mark's resolve hardened. "Yes. But Daddy is going to fix it. I promise." He spent the rest of the day on the phone, first to a pool remediation company. The man on the other end of the line whistled when Mark described the situation. "Motor oil, son. You're not just looking at a drain and clean. That stuff gets into the plaster, the pipes, the filter. You're looking at a complete resurfacing. It could be tens of thousands of dollars." Mark's stomach churned. It was money he didn't have. Sarah's medical bills had wiped out most of their savings. Next, he called his insurance company. They were sympathetic but non-committal. We'll have to send an adjuster out, but acts of vandalism by a third party can be tricky to prove. He knew he was on his own. Confronting Karen was pointless. The HOA was useless. The insurance company was a long shot. He felt a wave of despair wash over him. He looked out the window at the ruined pool, the symbol of his promise to his family, now a toxic mess. He saw Karen on her patio, sipping a drink, looking completely unbothered. That's when the idea sparked. It was a long shot, a crazy idea born of desperation and fury. He wasn't just dealing with a nasty neighbor. This wasn't just vandalism. This was contamination. This was an environmental issue. He sat down at his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He researched environmental laws, hazardous waste disposal, and groundwater contamination. He read about fines, regulations, and enforcement agencies. His search led him to a single powerful acronym, EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He found a hotline for reporting environmental violations. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. Was this an overreaction? Was he escalating this too far? He thought of Lily's trembling lip, of Karen's smug, triumphant smile. He thought of the tens of thousands of dollars to repair the damage. This wasn't just... The initial wave of victory was intoxicating, but it receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of the situation. The day after Karen was taken away, a team in hazmat suits descended on his backyard. They cordoned off the entire pool area with bright yellow tape that screamed biohazard, turning his sanctuary into a crime scene. The chemical smell was gone, replaced by the sterile, antiseptic odor of industrial cleaners. Men with clipboards took soil samples from his lawn and scraped residue from the concrete, their movements efficient and impersonal. His backyard was no longer his own. It was an EPA remediation site. Lily watched from the window, her nose pressed against the glass. "Are they going to fix the pool, Daddy?" "They are, sweet pea," Mark said, trying to inject a confidence he didn't feel into his voice. "It's just going to take some time." He learned just how much time that week. Agent Miller called to lay out the process. First, the assessments and lab reports. Then, a bidding process for EPA-certified cleanup crews. After that, the legal proceedings to compel Karen to pay for it all. "Realistically, Mr. Henderson, you're looking at several months before any major work can even begin." "I'm sorry. Months. The entire summer. Gone. Lily's summer of swimming and sunshine. Stolen. The promise he'd made to Sarah felt like a cruel joke. The news got worse. Karen was back. He saw her pull into her driveway 2 days after her. Arrest, stepping out of a sleek black town car. She hadn't been in a jail cell. She'd been at a lawyer's office. She didn't look panicked or defeated anymore. As she walked to her front door, she glanced over at his house, and the look in her eyes was no longer one of smug superiority. It was something far more chilling, cold, calculated hatred. The war had just entered a new phase. The harassment started subtly. A new security camera appeared on the corner of her house, its black lens aimed not at her own property, but directly at his back door and Lily's bedroom window. Then came the lights. 4 industrial-grade LED floodlights, the kind used to illuminate construction sites, were installed on her roofline. At dusk, they flickered on, bathing his entire backyard and the back half of his house in a harsh, unrelenting glare that turned night into a sterile, artificial day. Sleep became a luxury. He bought blackout curtains for Lily's room, but the light bled through the edges, a constant, oppressive presence. He called the police. An officer came, listened patiently, and then gave Mark a weary sigh. "Sir, there's no ordinance against a homeowner installing security lights." As long as they aren't shining directly into your window at a 90-degree angle, there's not much we can do. It's a civil matter. Next came the sound. It was a high-frequency, barely audible whine that started every evening around 9 p.m. and continued until dawn. At first, Mark thought it was a faulty appliance, but then he noticed Lily, tossing and turning in her bed, her hands pressed against her ears. "Daddy, what's that buzzing sound? It hurts my head." He went outside, following the noise. It was coming from a small black box mounted on Karen's fence, a sonic pest repeller designed to drive away rodents and other animals with a sound that was intensely irritating to younger ears. To Mark, it was a faint annoyance. To Lily, it was torture. Again, he called the police. Same officer, same weary response. "It's a pest control device, sir. It's not illegal. It's a civil matter." The phrase became a maddening mantra. It's a civil matter. It was a bureaucratic wall he couldn't seem to break through. Karen had found the perfect weapons, legal, deniable, and psychologically devastating. She was operating in the gray areas, waging a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The neighborhood, once a source of quiet comfort, became another front in the war. He saw Karen talking to other neighbors. Over the fence, her expression one of earnest concern. Soon, the friendly waves he used to receive were replaced with hesitant nods or averted eyes. He found out why when Mrs. Gable from across the street stopped him while he was getting the mail. "Mark," she said, her voice low, "I don't want to get involved, but you should know what she's saying." She explained that Karen was painting a picture of a grieving, unstable single father, lashing out and trying to extort a poor, innocent widow. She claimed the oil was from his own leaky lawnmower and that he'd called the EPA on her to avoid his own responsibility. The story was ludicrous, but Karen was persuasive. She was planting seeds of doubt, isolating him. The stress was a physical weight. Mark wasn't sleeping. He was losing focus at his job as a graphic designer. His patience was worn thin. He snapped at Lily for spilling her juice, and the look of fear in her eyes was like a knife in his gut. He was becoming the angry, unstable man Karen claimed he was. A month after the incident, a certified letter arrived from the EPA. It was the official remediation quote and a copy of the initial fines levied against Karen. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly. The cleanup cost for his property was estimated at $82,450. The fine for Karen, for violations of the Clean Water Act and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, was a staggering $210,000. For a moment, he felt a surge of vindication. It was a number, a tangible consequence for her actions. But the feeling evaporated when he read the accompanying legal notice. Karen's attorney had filed a motion to contest both the fines and the remediation costs, claiming faulty evidence and procedural errors. The process would be tied up in court for months, possibly years. Until then, the toxic pool sat in his backyard, a festering monument to her hatred, and the floodlights burned through his nights. He was trapped. The legal system was a slow, grinding machine, and Karen was exploiting its every loophole. The police were powerless. The neighbors were turning against him, and his daughter was paying the price. He felt a profound sense of failure, a despair so deep it was suffocating. He had tried to do the right thing, to play by the rules, and it had gotten him nowhere. One evening, sitting in his dimly lit living room, unable to sleep because of the incessant hum of the pest repeller, he found himself staring at Karen's house. The lights cast long, stark shadows across his own lawn. He was a prisoner in his own home. He realized then that the rules he was playing by were not the same rules Karen was. She wasn't interested in justice or fairness. She was interested in winning, in utterly destroying his peace. A cold clarity settled over him. If the system couldn't protect him, he would have to protect himself. If she wanted to fight a war in the gray areas, then he would have to learn the terrain. He had to stop reacting and start planning. He had to find a weapon she wouldn't see coming. He started watching her, not just casually but methodically. He documented everything. He logged the exact times the lights and the sonic device turned, on and off. He set up his own discreet security camera, aimed not at her, but at the street, documenting the comings and goings from her house. For weeks, it was nothing but the mailman, a grocery delivery service, and her lawyer's courier. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a different kind of vehicle pulled up. It was a nondescript white van from a commercial waste management company he'd never heard of. Peterson Industrial Solutions. The name struck him. Peterson was Karen's last name. Two men in greasy overalls got out, went to her backyard, and returned a few minutes later with two large, sealed plastic drums, which they loaded into the van before driving off. It was quiet, efficient, and professional, and it happened again the following Tuesday. Mark's mind raced. The barrels the EPA had found were old and rusted. These were new. Where was this waste coming from, and where was it going? Peterson, Industrial Solutions. He looked up the company online. It had a bare-bones website with a P.O. box for an address. It was a ghost, a front for something. He remembered what Agent Miller had said. Used motor oil and industrial solvents. This wasn't a hobbyist's garage junk. This was commercial-grade waste, the kind generated by auto shops, dry cleaners, or small manufacturing. Plants. The kind that was expensive to dispose of legally. The pieces started to click into place, forming a dark and ugly picture. Karen wasn't just a malicious neighbor. The barrels in her yard weren't just a weapon against him. They were part of a business, an illegal, off-the-books, hazardous waste disposal business. She was turning her quiet, suburban home into a miniature toxic dump, and he had a terrifying suspicion that the oil she'd poured into his pool was just a drop in the bucket. He finally understood. Her rage, her desperation to drive him away. It wasn't just about a petty neighborhood dispute. He wasn't just a threat to her peace. He was a threat to her entire illicit operation, and he was standing on the evidence. The realization that he was living next to a miniature, active, hazardous waste dump changed everything. The fear, a low-grade hum that had been his constant companion for months, sharpened into a blade of cold, focused anger. This was no longer about a ruined pool or sleepless nights. This was about his daughter's health. What had she been breathing in? What was seeping into the soil, into the groundwater? The thought of Lily playing in the yard, just feet from those barrels, made his blood run cold. He knew he couldn't. Just call Agent Miller with a hunch about a white van. Karen's lawyers had already stonewalled the EPA on the first incident. A new accusation without irrefutable proof would be dismissed as the ravings of a vindictive neighbor, just as Karen had planned. He needed to deliver them a case so airtight, so damning, that no lawyer could wriggle her out of it. He had to follow the van. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. He was a graphic designer, a suburban dad. His idea of a high-stakes operation was hitting a tight deadline. But as he looked at Lily, sleeping fitfully under the glare of Karen's floodlights, he knew he had no choice. He would become whatever he needed to be to protect her. The next Tuesday, he was ready. He'd told his boss he had a stomach bug and would be working from home. He arranged for Lily to have a play date at a friend's house across town. He rented a nondescript sedan from a cheap rental agency, paying in cash. He bought a burner phone and a dash cam, the kind that records on a continuous loop. He felt like a character in a spy movie, and the absurdity of it would have been comical if the stakes weren't so high. He sat in the rental car, parked down the street, his heart hammering against his ribs. The wait was agonizing. Every passing car made him jump. Finally, at 2:15 p.m., the white van from Peterson Industrial Solutions turned onto their street. He started the car, his hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. He watched as the two men, burly and silent, did their work, loading 2 more sealed drums into the back of the van. As the van pulled away from the curb, Mark took a deep breath and fell in behind it, keeping a safe distance of 3 cars back. The van led him on a meandering route through the city, away from the manicured lawns of their suburb and into the gritty industrial outskirts. Warehouses with broken windows and rusting fences replaced neat brick homes. He followed it for nearly an hour, his focus absolute, his adrenaline singing in his veins. Finally, the van turned off the main road and onto a dirt track, a plume of dust rising behind it. A faded, bullet-riddled sign at the turnoff read, Treslewood. Reclamation! But the rusted chain-link gate was wide open. Mark pulled over before the turnoff, his heart sinking. He couldn't follow them in. His car would be instantly spotted. He killed the engine and waited, his mind racing. He had to get inside. He had to see what they were doing. After 20 minutes, the van emerged, empty now, and sped back toward the main road. This was his chance. He got out of the car, grabbed a small backpack containing a bottle of water, his burner phone, and a pair of binoculars, and jogged toward the dirt track. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and decay. The gate was unlocked. He slipped, through, his senses on high alert. The track wound through a desolate landscape of cracked earth and struggling weeds. After a quarter mile, it opened into a clearing. The sight made him gag. It was a graveyard of industrial waste. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of barrels, in various states of decay, were piled high. Some were leaking a dark, viscous fluid that pooled, on the ground in iridescent slicks, just like the one that had poisoned his pool. The ground was stained with chemical burns, and a large, stagnant pond in the center of the clearing shimmered with an unnatural, oily sheen. He could hear voices. The 2 men from the van were standing by the pond, laughing. One of them casually tossed a cigarette butt into the water, which hissed and released a puff of noxious green smoke. Mark ducked behind a pile of rusted metal, his stomach churning, with a mixture of fear and disgust. He pulled out the burner phone and started recording, using the zoom function to get a clear shot of the men and the license plate of their van. He panned across the landscape, capturing the mountains of barrels, the leaking chemicals, the poisoned pond. He knew this was the evidence he needed. This was the smoking gun. He stayed for nearly an hour, hidden, documenting everything. He saw the men take 2 empty barrels from a pile, rinse them in the toxic pond, and load them back into the van. They were reusing them. The whole operation was a sickening, dangerous sham. As he prepared to leave, his foot slipped on a patch of loose gravel. He stumbled, knocking over a piece of sheet metal with a loud clang. The men's laughter stopped. "The hell was that?" one of them growled. Mark's blood turned to ice. He flattened himself against the ground, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. He could hear their heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel as they approached his hiding spot. This was it. He was caught. 1,000 terrifying scenarios flashed through his mind. "Probably just a coyote," the other man said, his voice laced with boredom. "This place is full of them. Let's get out of here. I'm starving." The footsteps receded. Mark didn't dare breathe until he heard the van's engine start and fade into the distance. He lay there for a full 10 minutes, his body trembling, before he finally found the strength to move. He scrambled back to his car, his clothes reeking of chemicals, his mind reeling from what he had seen and the close call he had just survived. He drove straight to Agent Miller's office at the EPA's regional headquarters. He didn't have an appointment, but he didn't care. He walked up to the front desk, the burner phone clutched in his hand like a holy relic. "I need to see Agent Miller," he said, his voice hoarse. "Tell him Mark Henderson is here, and tell him I have proof of a massive illegal dumping operation." 20 minutes later, he was sitting in a sterile conference room with Miller and 2 other agents, a grim-faced woman who introduced herself as the head of the Criminal Investigation Division and a lawyer from the EPA's enforcement branch. He played the video from the burner phone on a large monitor. The room was silent as they watched the footage. Miller's jaw tightened. The lawyer muttered a string of curses under his breath. When the video ended, the female agent looked at Mark, her eyes sharp and intense. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "you took a tremendous risk coming out here. You should have called us." "I did call you," Mark shot back, his own anger flaring. "I called you months ago. And in the meantime, my daughter and I have been living in hell. Your system is too slow. I did what I had to do." Agent Miller held up a hand. "He's right, Linda. We dropped the ball. The legal challenges slowed us down." He turned to Mark. "What you've given us here, this changes the game. This isn't just a civil violation anymore. This is a criminal conspiracy." The lawyer nodded, his eyes gleaming. "With this evidence, we can get warrants. We can seize financial records, computer hard drives. We can connect Peterson Industrial Solutions not just to Karen Peterson, but to every single business that paid her to make their waste disappear. She thought she was just fighting a nuisance lawsuit with a neighbor. She has no idea what's coming for her." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy washed over Mark. It was finally over. He had done it. As he was leaving, Agent Miller walked him to the door. "You know, Mark," he said, his voice softer now. "We get calls like yours all the time. Petty disputes, angry neighbors. It's easy to get jaded. But you reminded me why we do this job. You stood up when it would have been easier to just move away. You fought back." Mark just nodded, too emotionally exhausted to speak. He drove home in a daze, the events of the day playing over and over in his mind. When he walked through his front door, Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "You were gone a long time, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against his jeans. He picked her up, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. The faint chemical smell still clung to his clothes, a reminder of the toxic world he had stepped into. But as he held his daughter, he knew with absolute certainty that he would walk through fire to keep her safe. He had faced down Karen's hatred and the system's indifference. He had walked into the belly of the beast and come out with the truth. The power had shifted. He was no longer the victim. He was the one holding the weapon, and he was about to bring Karen Peterson's entire corrupt world crashing down around her. The raid happened at dawn. It wasn't a quiet knock on the door. It was a full-scale federal operation. Mark was awake, as he usually was now at 5 a.m., staring at the ceiling, the high-frequency hum from next door, a dull ache in his skull. The first sign was the sudden, shocking silence as the power to Karen's house was cut. The floodlights that had stolen his nights blinked out, plunging the world into a blessed pre-dawn darkness. Then came the sounds. The rumble of heavy vehicles, the sharp, authoritative shouts, and the unmistakable splintering crash of a battering ram against a front door. Mark rushed to the window, his heart jackhammering in his chest. The street was filled with dark SUVs and vans, their red and blue lights flashing silently, painting the houses in strobing, surreal colors. Men in tactical gear with EPA criminal investigation, stenciled in bold yellow letters on their backs, swarmed Karen's property. He saw them lead a stunned, disheveled Karen out in her silk pajamas, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. This time there was no sleek town car waiting for her. They put her in the back of a standard police cruiser, her hands cuffed behind her back. He watched as they carried out box after box of documents, computer towers, and hard drives. A separate hazmat team was already in the backyard, carefully cataloging and removing the new barrels he'd seen delivered. The entire neighborhood was awake now, lights flicking on in every house, faces appearing in windows. The narrative Karen had so carefully constructed of the unstable, vindictive single dad was being dismantled before their very eyes. Later that morning, Mrs. Gable from across the street approached him as he walked to his car, her face etched with shame. "Mark, we had no idea. We're so sorry." Mark just gave a tired nod. It's okay, Carol. She was convincing. He didn't have the energy for recriminations. All he had was a profound, bone-deep weariness. The raid was the lead story on the local news that night. They showed aerial footage of the illegal dump site he'd discovered, calling it one of the largest unregulated hazardous waste sites found in the state in a decade. They named Karen Peterson as the mastermind of a criminal enterprise that had endangered the health of an entire community. Her mugshot, raw and stripped of all its suburban artifice, flashed on the screen. She looked like what she was, a common criminal. For the first time in months, Mark and Lily slept through the night. There were no lights, no high-frequency noise. There was only a deep, peaceful silence. The next day, an EPA-mandated cleanup, crew arrived not just to assess, but to begin work. The yellow tape came down, heavy machinery rolled into his backyard, and the methodical work of draining the toxic pool and excavating the contaminated soil began. It felt like a victory. But Karen was not the type to go down without a fight. She was released on $1 million bond, secured by a lien against her commercial properties, the ones the EPA hadn't yet seized. Mark saw her return, not to her house, which was now a sealed federal crime scene, but to a rental car that she parked across the street, and she just sat there, watching. For 2 days, she was a constant, unnerving presence. She'd sit in her car for hours, her gaze fixed on his house. The hatred radiating from her was a palpable force. He called the police, but they could do nothing. She was on a public street. She wasn't breaking any laws. He took Lily to school one morning and saw the rental car fall in behind him. She followed him all the way to the school, staying a block behind, never getting close enough to be threatening, but making sure he knew she was there. It was a cold, deliberate act of intimidation. He reported it to Agent Miller, who promised to speak to the U.S. attorney about a restraining order, but again, the wheels of justice turned slowly. The psychological warfare had returned, but this time it was darker, more personal. One afternoon, a package was delivered to his door. It was a small, elegantly wrapped box with no return address. He opened it cautiously. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single, dead bird. Tucked beneath it was a photograph. It was a picture of Lily on the school playground, taken from a distance, the image slightly blurry as if from a telephoto lens. Mark's blood ran cold. This was no longer about property or peace. She was threatening his child. He called 911, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it almost choked him. He called Agent Miller, screaming into the phone. The local police came and took a report, their faces grim. The federal agents promised to expedite the restraining order, but Mark knew it was just a piece of paper. A piece of paper wouldn't stop a woman who had nothing left to lose. That night, he put a chair under the doorknob. He sat in the dark of his living room holding a heavy aluminum baseball bat and watched Karen's car across the street. He was no longer a graphic designer. He was a sentry, a protector. He had poked the hornet's nest, and now the queen was coming for him, for his daughter, and he knew with a terrifying certainty that she would stop at nothing. Around 3 a.m., he saw the car door open. Karen got out. She wasn't looking at his house, but down the street. A dark pickup truck with its lights off rolled to a stop in front of her car. She spoke briefly to the driver, a large, shadowy figure, and then got back in her car and drove away. The truck, however, remained. Pulled slowly into the driveway of the vacant house 2 doors down, Mark's heart pounded. This was it. This was something new. This wasn't a direct confrontation. It was something more calculated, more sinister. He watched as the figure got out of the truck. The man was carrying a gas can. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with sweat, and dialed 911 again, whispering frantically to the dispatcher. He told them what he was seeing, the address of the vacant house, the man with the gas can. He didn't know what the plan was, but he knew it was aimed at him. Was he trying to start a fire to spread to his house? To create a diversion? He heard a faint scraping sound from his own backyard. His head snapped toward the sound. The cleanup crew had left a temporary chain-link fence around the excavated pool, but it wouldn't stop a determined intruder. He crept to the sliding glass door and peered into the oppressive darkness of his yard. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadow of the fence. A second man. It was a coordinated attack, a diversion at the front, a direct assault from the back. Karen hadn't just come back to watch. She had come back to finish it. He was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, whispering, "He's in my backyard! There's another one in my backyard!" when he heard the soft, metallic click of the lock on his sliding glass door being picked. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in the space of a single terrified heartbeat. The click of the lock was the loudest sound Mark had ever heard. He dropped the phone, the dispatcher's frantic voice a tiny, distant squawk. He gripped the aluminum bat, his knuckles white. There was no time to think, only to act. Lily was asleep upstairs. He was the only thing standing between her and the monster coming through the door. The sliding glass door slid open with a soft, grating sound. A large silhouette filled the frame, a hulking shape against the faint moonlight. The man stepped inside, moving with a quiet confidence that spoke of prior experience. Mark didn't hesitate. He lunged from the shadows of the living room, swinging, the bat with every ounce of fear and fury he possessed. The crack of the bat connecting with the intruder's shoulder was sickeningly loud, followed by a grunt of pain and surprise. The man staggered back, cursing. But he was big. The blow hadn't taken him down. He turned, his face contorted in a snarl, and lunged at Mark. They crashed into a bookshelf, sending books and picture frames, images of Sarah, of Lily, of a happier time, scattering across the floor. Mark was fighting for his life. The man was stronger, heavier, but Mark was fueled by pure primal adrenaline. He brought the bat up, jamming it into the man's throat. The intruder gagged, his hands flying to his neck, and Mark used the moment to shove him away. He scrambled back, raising the bat again, his chest heaving. Outside, the night erupted in chaos, the flashing red and blue lights that had been a distant hope were now a blinding reality, washing through the windows. He heard shouts of, "Police, drop your weapon!" from the front of the house. The man with the gas can had been caught. The intruder in his living room heard it too. Panic flashed in his eyes. He glanced at the back door, then back at Mark, weighing his options. Just as he tensed to make a run for it, the front door of Mark's house burst open, and 2 police officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Freeze! Get! On the ground! Now!" The intruder's fight was gone. He slowly raised his hands, his face a mixture of pain and resignation. As the officers cuffed him, Mark finally lowered the bat, his body trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline leaving, him weak and nauseous. The night was a blur of police, paramedics, and federal agents. Agent Miller arrived, his face a grim mask. They found the second man's accomplice, the arsonist, dousing the side of the vacant house with gasoline. The plan, as the thugs would later confess in exchange for a lighter sentence, was simple and brutal. They were to set a massive fire 2 doors down. When Mark inevitably came out to see the commotion, the man in the backyard was supposed to take care of him. It wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was attempted murder. And the star witness who could tie it all together, who had hired them and promised them a hefty payday, was Karen Peterson. They found her 10 miles away, sitting in her rental car, at an all-night diner, calmly drinking a cup of coffee, waiting for the news. When the police cruiser surrounded her, her composure finally shattered. The ensuing legal implosion was swift and total. Her $1 million bond was revoked. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Mark's video, the financial records, the testimony of her own hired muscle, her high-priced lawyers dropped her. The EPA's case, once a civil matter, was now the least of her worries. She was facing a raft of state and federal charges, from conspiracy to commit arson and murder for hire to dozens of environmental felonies. The trial was a formality. The U.S. attorney painted a picture of a woman consumed by greed and arrogance, who poisoned the earth for profit and tried to eliminate a man who dared to stand in her way. The jury was out for less than an hour. She was found guilty on all counts. Mark was in the courtroom for the sentencing. He watched as Karen, dressed in a drab prison jumpsuit, her severe blonde bob now limp and graying, stood before the judge. She was a hollowed-out version of the imperious woman who had sneered at him over the fence. The judge was merciless. He spoke of her callous disregard for human life and the environment, her campaign of terror against a grieving father and his young child. He sentenced her to 30 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. As she was led away, her eyes, for one brief moment, met Mark's. There was no hatred left in them. There was nothing. Just a vast, empty void. 6 months later, the sun was shining. The sound of laughter, clear and bright, echoed across a backyard that was once again a sanctuary. The pool, completely resurfaced and refilled, was a shimmering, impossible blue. The new sod was a lush, vibrant green. The only reminder of the nightmare was a state-of-the-art security system Mark had installed, a silent guardian watching over their hard-won peace. Lily, in a new pink and purple swimsuit, launched herself off the diving board with a squeal of pure joy, sending a cascade of sparkling water into the air. Mark, treading water in the deep end, laughed as the spray hit his face. It felt like a baptism, a washing away of the fear and the anger that had poisoned their lives for so long. He had fulfilled his promise to Sarah. He had given Lily her perfect summer, even if it was a year late. As he watched his daughter swim, a fierce, protective love swelled in his chest. He had fought a war he never wanted, against an enemy he could never have imagined. He had walked through the fire and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. The scars were there, hidden beneath the surface, but they were a reminder of what he was capable of how far he would go to protect his family. The water was cool, the sun was warm, and for the first time in a very long time, they were home.